At 24, Amara Thompson danced alone in hotel ballrooms at 1 in the morning, believing her secret was safe until Korean crime boss Park Jae-hyun spotted her through the shadows and ordered his men to get her immediately. She was a woman whose dreams had been traded for survival, whose grace had been hidden behind mop buckets and cleaning rags. But some things cannot stay buried forever. The Grand Meridian Hotel stood like a monument to wealth and power in the heart of Seoul, its marble floors gleaming under crystal chandeliers even in the dead of night. Amara moved through its corridors with practiced silence, her cleaning cart wheels muffled by years of experience. She knew every corner, every shadow, every moment when the building truly slept. She was tired, bone-deep, soul-crushing tired that came from working double shifts 6 days a week while sending most of her paycheck back to Detroit for her mother's medical bills. At 24, she should have been finishing her dance degree at Michigan State. Instead, she was emptying trash cans and scrubbing toilets in a foreign country, trying to make ends meet that never seemed to touch. But her natural hair, styled in neat protective braids, still caught the light when she moved. Her long limbs still held the fluid grace that had once made professors call her exceptional. Her brown skin still glowed with the health and strength that no amount of exhaustion could fully diminish. She was beautiful, even in her faded uniform and worn sneakers. Tonight, like every night for the past 8 months, she saved the ballroom for last. Not because it was the hardest to clean, but because it was the only place she could remember who she used to be. The Celestial Ballroom occupied the entire 15th floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of Seoul's glittering skyline. During the day, it hosted million-dollar weddings and corporate galas. At night, it belonged to her and her alone. Amara finished mopping the marble floor, then carefully positioned her cart by the service door. She pulled out her phone, scrolled to her carefully curated playlist, and set it on the window ledge. The first notes of a contemporary piece filled the vast empty space. She closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. Then she began to move. Her body remembered everything her mind tried to forget. The extension, the control, the way emotion could flow through muscle and bone to create something transcendent. She leaped, turned, melted to the floor, and rose again like water finding its level. For these stolen moments, she wasn't a maid. She was a dancer. She was art in motion. Amara spun across the polished marble, her reflection multiplying in the mirrored walls, creating an infinity of movement and grace. This was her sanctuary, her secret rebellion against a life that had crushed her dreams but couldn't quite kill her spirit. She didn't know she was being watched. Park Jae-hyun stepped out of the private elevator that served his penthouse office on the 20th floor. At 35, he was the undisputed head of the Park family operations in Seoul, controlling everything from high-end real estate to shipping routes to protection networks that kept the city's underworld in careful balance. He dressed in custom Italian suits that cost more than most people made in a year, his sharp Korean features set in permanent lines of control and calculation. Tonight had been long. Meetings with suppliers, negotiations with rivals, decisions that affected hundreds of lives and millions of dollars. He was heading to his car when he noticed the light in the ballroom. Security should have reported this. No one was authorized to be in the building after midnight except essential personnel, and the ballroom had been cleaned hours ago. His jaw tightened as he considered the possibilities. Corporate espionage, theft, security breach. He moved toward the ballroom with the predatory grace of a man accustomed to danger, his expensive leather shoes silent on the marble floor. But when he reached the glass doors, he stopped. A woman was dancing, not just moving to music, but truly dancing with a skill and passion that made him forget to breathe. She was young, black, wearing the hotel's cleaning uniform, but when she moved, she transformed. Her body carved through space with a precision that spoke of years of training, an artistry that belonged on the world's greatest stages. He recognized her, the night maid, quiet, efficient, invisible in the way that good service staff learned to be. He'd seen her perhaps a dozen times in 8 months and never given her a second thought. Now he couldn't look away. She was beautiful, not pretty, not attractive, but genuinely beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or expensive clothes and everything to do with the grace in her movement, the passion in her expression, the way she seemed to glow from within when she danced. How long had she been doing this? How long had this extraordinary talent been hiding in plain sight, cleaning his hotel, invisible to everyone including him? Park Jae-hyun was a man who recognized value when he saw it. Art, talent, rare things that could not be bought or manufactured. This woman, this maid, possessed something priceless. And she was wasted. The music ended. The woman, Amara, he remembered her name now, stood breathing hard in the center of the ballroom, her face flushed with exertion and joy. For a moment, she looked like she might cry. Then she collected herself, walked to her phone, and prepared to return to reality. That was when he made his decision. Park Jae-hyun pulled out his phone and called his head of security. When the man answered on the first ring, as he always did, Jae-hyun's voice was quiet and commanding. "Bring me the night maid from the ballroom. Now." "Sir, which one?" "The dancer. Bring her to my office immediately." He ended the call and walked toward the private elevator. Behind him, he heard the ballroom door open, heard the sharp intake of breath as his security team announced themselves to the woman who had just been caught in her moment of stolen beauty. He didn't look back, but he found himself walking faster, eager to understand exactly what he had discovered in the shadows of his own building. Amara's world shattered the moment the door opened. Two large Korean men in expensive suits filled the doorway, their expressions professional but intimidating. Her phone clattered to the floor as her hands flew up in instinctive surrender. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, her voice shaking. "I was just finishing cleaning. I'll leave right now." The larger man stepped forward, his English accented but clear. "Mr. Park wants to see you immediately." Mr. Park, the owner, the man whose presence in the building made even the general manager nervous, whose name was spoken in whispers, whose business interests seemed to extend far beyond hotels. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs. She was going to be fired, deported. Her mother would lose her medical coverage. 8 months of sacrifice would be for nothing. "What does he want?" she whispered. "To talk," the man replied. He gestured toward the door. "Please come with us." It wasn't really a request. Amara grabbed her phone with trembling fingers, left her cleaning cart where it stood, and followed the men out of the ballroom. The elevator ride to the 20th floor felt like ascending to her own execution. She had never been in the penthouse level. The hallway was a study in understated luxury, all dark wood paneling and subtle lighting. Original artwork hung on the walls, pieces that probably cost more than her entire education would have. The men led her to a set of double doors, knocked once, and gestured for her to enter. The office beyond was exactly what she expected from a man of Park Jae-hyun's reputation. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Seoul's skyline. The furniture was minimal but exquisite, every piece chosen for both beauty and function. The air smelled faintly of expensive cologne and leather. Park Jae-hyun sat behind a massive desk, still wearing his perfectly tailored suit despite the late hour. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps mid-30s, with the kind of sharp, controlled features that belonged in magazines. His dark eyes missed nothing as they studied her from across the room. When he spoke, his English was flawless, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Sit, Amara." The fact that he knew her name should not have surprised her, but it did. She perched on the edge of the chair across from his desk, trying to make herself as small as possible. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. "You're Mr. Park, the owner, among other things." His eyes never left her face. "Tell me about your dancing." The question caught her completely off guard. "I don't know what you mean, sir. I watched you tonight. In the ballroom." His voice revealed nothing. "Where did you train?" Amara's mouth went dry. She could lie, but something about this man suggested that lies would not be tolerated. "I studied at Michigan State. Dance program. I left before graduating." "Why?" "Financial reasons," she said quietly. "My mother got sick. I needed to work. And you chose to work as a night maid in Seoul." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "The pay is better than anything I could get in Detroit without a degree. Medical insurance that covers international dependents." He leaned back in his chair, still studying her with that unsettling intensity. "How long have you been using my ballroom as your personal studio?" 8 months, she whispered. "Since I started here." "I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have. I just what?" "I needed to remember who I used to be." For the first time since she'd entered the room, something shifted in Park Jae-hyun's expression. Not quite sympathy, but recognition of something familiar. And who were you, Amara Thompson? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibilities she couldn't begin to understand. Outside the windows, Seoul glittered like a city of dreams, beautiful and untouchable. Who was she? A dreamer whose dreams had been sacrificed for survival. A daughter whose love meant working in shadows. A dancer whose stage had become stolen moments in empty ballrooms. But looking into Park Jae-hyun's dark eyes, she suspected her answer might determine not just tonight, but everything that came after. I was a dancer, Amara said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I was going to be a professional dancer. Park Jae-hyun leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes never leaving her face. Past tense. My mother was diagnosed with lupus during my junior year. The medical bills, the insurance problems. I had to choose between finishing my degree and keeping her alive. And you chose her. It wasn't really a choice, Amara replied. She could feel her hands trembling and clasped them together in her lap. Any daughter would have done the same thing. Would they? His voice held no judgment, only curiosity. Tell me about Michigan State. The question surprised her. She had expected anger about the unauthorized use of his ballroom, threats about her job security. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested in her story. I was on partial scholarship, she said carefully. Contemporary dance with a focus on choreography. I made it to the final round of auditions for the Ailey Company my sophomore year. Almost made it. Almost. He stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that dominated one wall of his office. Seoul spread out below them like a constellation, millions of lights representing millions of lives. What happened at the audition? I was good, but not quite good enough. There were girls who had been training since they were 3. I started when I was 8. The gap showed in my technique. But not in your passion. The observation caught her off guard. How could he know that from watching her dance for a few minutes through a doorway? You saw all that from the hallway, she asked. I see many things, Amara Thompson. He turned back to face her, his expression unreadable. I see a woman with extraordinary talent working as a night maid because she sacrificed her dreams for family. I see exhaustion she tries to hide, bruises on her hands from chemical burns, calluses from work that should never touch a dancer's body. Amara looked down at her hands instinctively. She hadn't realized the small injuries were visible to anyone else. She had become so accustomed to hiding them, to pretending the physical toll of her work didn't matter. I see someone who still practices in secret because giving up entirely would kill something essential inside her, he continued. His voice was quiet but penetrating. Tell me, how long has it been since you danced on a real stage? 3 years, she whispered. And how long since you danced for anyone but yourself? Tonight, when you watched me. The admission hung between them like a confession. Amara felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with the power differential between them and everything to do with being truly seen for the first time in years. Park Jae-hyun walked back to his desk, but didn't sit down. Instead, he leaned against it, his posture casual, but his attention focused entirely on her. Why Seoul? He asked. The teaching jobs here pay better than anything I could get in the States without finishing my degree. The medical coverage extends to international dependents. I can send home enough money to keep my mother's treatments going while still covering my own expenses. Barely, he observed. Amara's cheeks flushed. It was true. She survived on instant noodles and off-brand everything. Lived in a studio apartment that was barely large enough for a bed and a hot plate. Every luxury, every small comfort was sacrificed so she could send more money home. I manage, she said defensively. Do you? His eyes traveled over her face, noting details she wished he couldn't see. When did you last have a proper meal? When did you last sleep 8 hours without interruption? When did you last do something purely for your own pleasure that didn't involve stolen moments in empty ballrooms? The questions hit like physical blows because she couldn't answer any of them with anything resembling satisfaction. She worked, she sent money home, she existed. Living was a luxury she couldn't afford. My mother is alive, she said firmly. That's what matters. Admirable, Park Jae-hyun said. And unsustainable. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Amara wanted to argue, to defend her choices, but exhaustion weighed on her shoulders like a physical thing. She was tired of fighting, tired of pretending she was fine, tired of sacrificing everything for a survival that felt more like slow drowning. "What do you want from me, Mr. Park?" she asked finally. He smiled for the first time since she'd entered his office. It was a small expression, barely more than a curve at the corner of his mouth, but it transformed his entire face. For a moment, he looked less like a dangerous businessman and more like a man who had discovered something unexpectedly delightful. "I want you to dance for me," he said. "I just finished working a 12-hour shift. I'm not exactly dressed for performance. You were dressed exactly the same way 20 minutes ago in my ballroom, and that was the most compelling performance I've seen in years." Amara felt her pulse quicken. There was something in his voice, a note of command that made it clear this was not really a request. "Here. Now. Here. Now." She looked around his office. The space was large enough, certainly, and the marble floor would provide adequate surface for movement. But this was his private domain, his seat of power. Dancing here felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. "I don't have music," she said weakly. "I do." He touched something on his desk, and suddenly the room filled with a piece she recognized. A contemporary composition, complex and emotional. The kind of music that demanded technical skill and artistic interpretation in equal measure. "This isn't a request, is it?" she asked. "Very few things I say are requests, Amara. But this particular command is not a punishment. It's an opportunity." "For what?" "For both of us to see what you're truly capable of when someone is watching who understands the difference between competence and artistry." The music swelled around them, filling the space with possibility and challenge. Amara closed her eyes, feeling the familiar stirring in her chest that came when music called to her body. She could refuse, walk away, return to her cart and her quiet life of invisible survival. But when she opened her eyes, Park Ji-hyun was watching her with an expression of patient expectation, as if he already knew what she would choose. She stepped into the center of his office, feeling the cool marble beneath her feet, and began to move. This time was different. This time she danced knowing she was seen, knowing she was being evaluated by someone who recognized what he was watching. The vulnerability was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She let the music carry her through sequences that showcased her technical training and emotional range. Extensions that demonstrated years of discipline, turns that showed her control, movements that flowed together with the seamless grace that separated true dancers from mere athletes. When the music ended, she found herself breathing hard in the center of his office, her reflection multiplied in the darkened windows that surrounded them. Park Jae-hyun had not moved from his position against the desk, but his expression had changed completely. "Extraordinary," he said quietly. The single word carried more weight than paragraphs of praise might have from someone else. This was a man who dealt in absolutes, who saw value or he didn't, who invested in potential or he walked away. "What happens now?" Amara asked. "Now we discuss business." He returned to his chair, his posture shifting back to the controlled formality she had seen when she first entered. But something had changed between them. Some barrier had shifted. "What kind of business?" "You have a rare talent being wasted on night shift maintenance. I have need of someone with your particular skills." "For what?" "Entertainment. Cultural events. Occasions when artistry serves a purpose beyond mere aesthetics." That told her exactly nothing and everything at the same time. This man's business was not hotels, or not only hotels. The way he spoke, the careful precision of his words, the office that felt more like a fortress than a corporate space. "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Park?" "I'm offering you a choice, Amara Thompson. Continue as you are, surviving day to day, watching your dreams disappear a little more each morning. Or accept an arrangement that could change everything." "What kind of arrangement?" "The kind that requires absolute trust and absolute discretion." His dark eyes held hers steadily. "The kind that could solve your mother's medical problems permanently and give you a stage worthy of your talent. And in exchange, you belong to me." The words hung between them like a challenge and a promise. Outside the windows, Seoul glittered in the darkness, beautiful and dangerous and full of possibilities she had never dared to imagine. Amara Thompson had spent 3 years making impossible choices, sacrificing everything for survival. Now she stood in the office of one of the most powerful men in Seoul, being offered something that sounded like salvation wrapped in silk and shadows. The question was whether she was brave enough to say yes to the devil who danced. There are tensions in the city right now, Park Jae-hyun continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. Business complications that require careful management. I have use for someone with your talents, someone who can move through certain circles with grace and intelligence. What circles? She asked, though part of her already knew the answer. The kind where art and influence intersect, where beauty can disarm and talent can open doors that money alone cannot. You want me to spy? I want you to dance, Amara. Everything else is simply context. The music had ended, but she could still feel it thrumming in her veins, could still feel the rush of being seen and appreciated for what she truly was. 3 years of hiding, 3 years of diminishing herself, 3 years of slow starvation of her soul. Think about it, he said, but don't think too long. Opportunity has an expiration date, and the city grows more dangerous each day. How dangerous? Dangerous enough that talented young women who work alone at night should have protection. Dangerous enough that independence might be a luxury you can't afford. It wasn't quite a threat, but it wasn't comfort either. It was a statement of fact delivered in a voice that brooked no argument. I need time, Amara said. You have until tomorrow night. Same time, same place. Your answer then will determine everything that follows. He stood, indicating the meeting was over. His men appeared as if summoned by telepathy, ready to escort her back to her regular world of mop buckets and invisible existence. But as she walked toward the door, Park Jae-hyun's voice stopped her one final time. Amara. She turned back to face him. Whatever you decide, never doubt what I saw tonight. You are extraordinary. The only question is whether you'll allow yourself to be treated as such. The elevator ride down felt like descending from a dream into harsh reality. But as Amara returned to her cleaning cart and her routine, she carried with her the memory of music filling an impossible office, of moving with purpose and power, of being seen as magnificent by someone who clearly knew the difference between mediocrity and greatness. Tomorrow night, she would have to choose between safety and possibility, between survival and truly living. The question was whether she had the courage to dance with the devil, even if he might be the only one who truly understood the music. Amara spent the next day existing in a haze of possibility and terror. Every moment of her regular shift felt surreal, as if she was moving through someone else's life while her real self remained suspended in Park Jae-hyun's office, dancing to music that still echoed in her bones. She cleaned rooms mechanically, her body performing familiar tasks while her mind replayed every word of their conversation. You are extraordinary. You belong to me. Choose between survival and truly living. By evening, she had convinced herself a dozen times to refuse whatever offer he planned to make. She had also convinced herself a dozen times to accept it. The uncertainty was eating her alive. But as she prepared for her night shift, she noticed changes in the hotel's atmosphere. Security guards who usually chatted casually with staff now moved with military precision. Managers spoke in hushed voices, their expressions tight with concern. The very air seemed charged with tension. Something was wrong. Amara had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when powerful people were nervous. In her 8 months at the Grand Meridian, she had become skilled at making herself invisible, which meant she saw and heard things others missed. Tonight, those instincts screamed danger. She was restocking supplies in the service corridor when she overheard 2 security guards speaking in rapid Korean. Her Korean was limited but functional, enough to catch fragments that made her blood run cold. Yamamoto. Threats. Increased patrols. Staff safety. Yamamoto was a name she had heard whispered before, always with fear and respect. A rival family. Someone had once explained when they thought no one was listening. Dangerous competition for territory and influence. Now they were making moves against park interests, and the hotel was caught in the crossfire. Amara finished her early rounds quickly, hyper-aware of every shadow, every unexpected sound. When midnight approached, she found herself torn between relief and dread. Relief that she had survived another shift in an increasingly dangerous environment. Dread because she knew Park Jae-hyun would be waiting for her answer. She made her way to the ballroom, but before she could even set up her music, the private elevator chimed softly. He had arrived early. Park Jae-hyun emerged wearing another perfectly tailored suit, but tonight his usual controlled composure carried an edge of barely contained intensity. His sharp features were set in harder lines, his dark eyes scanning the ballroom with the systematic attention of a man assessing threats. "You feel it too," he said without preamble. "The tension. Something's happening, isn't it?" Amara replied. "The staff is scared. The staff should be scared." He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, his reflection ghost-like in the darkened glass. "My business has many facets, Amara. Some of them make enemies." "What kind of enemies?" "The kind that solve problems by eliminating them permanently." The words hung between them like a physical presence. Amara felt her heart rate spike as the implications became clear. "Are you saying I'm in danger just by working here?" "I'm saying that talented young women who might be useful to me become targets for those who wish to cause me pain." He turned to face her, his expression deadly serious. "Which brings us to tonight's conversation with new urgency." "What do you mean?" "I mean that the choice I offered you yesterday is no longer theoretical. Events are moving quickly, and neutrality is becoming impossible." Amara's mouth went dry. "You're talking about protection, among other things." He gestured to a pair of chairs that hadn't been there the night before, positioned near the windows with a small table between them. "Please sit. We have business to discuss." The formal setup made her pulse quicken with anxiety. This wasn't going to be another casual conversation. This was a negotiation, and she suspected the stakes were higher than she had imagined. Park Jae-hyun waited until she was seated before taking his own chair. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I am prepared to offer you $200,000 per year," he said without preamble. "Your mother's medical expenses will be covered in full through a private health service that specializes in international care. You will be relocated to a secure apartment in the Gangnam district, furnished according to your preferences." Amara's breath caught. $200,000 was more money than she had ever imagined having. Her mother's medical bills alone consumed $40,000 annually, and that was with insurance fighting every claim. "In exchange, you will provide dance instruction and performance services for select events and gatherings. You will live under my protection and report only to me. You will maintain absolute discretion regarding anything you see or hear in the course of your duties." "What kind of events?" she asked, though her voice barely qualified as a whisper. "Cultural gatherings. Business entertaining. Occasions where artistry serves diplomatic purposes." His eyes never left her face. "You would be teaching dance to the children and wives of my associates, performing at celebrations and ceremonies, using your talent to create beauty in a world that often lacks it." It sounded reasonable, almost too reasonable. "And the protection you mentioned. You would live in a secure building with professional security staff. Your movements would be monitored for your own safety. Any threats against you would be eliminated before they could manifest." The word eliminated carried particular weight coming from him. "What about my freedom?" she asked. "Freedom to do what?" "Continue working overnight cleaning shifts for wages that barely cover your basic needs. Continue sending every spare dollar home while you slowly waste away from exhaustion and malnutrition. Continue hiding your extraordinary talent because the world doesn't value what it cannot profit from." The harsh truth of her current existence laid out so clinically made her flinch. "Your freedom would be exchanged for security, purpose, and the ability to use your gifts as they were meant to be used," he continued. "The question is whether you value theoretical independence over actual opportunity. What happens if I refuse? You return to your previous life, with the understanding that my protection no longer extends to you. Given current circumstances, that could prove problematic." "Is that a threat?" "It's a reality. The Yamamoto family has decided to pressure my operations by targeting assets they perceive as valuable to me. Unfortunately, talented individuals in my employ often fall into that category. So I'm damned if I do and damned if I don't. You're protected if you accept and vulnerable if you refuse. The choice is still yours, but the consequences are no longer hypothetical." Before Amara could respond, the lights in the ballroom flickered and went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. In the distance, she could hear shouts and the sound of running feet. Park Jae-hyun was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to something inside his jacket. His entire demeanor shifted from businessman to predator in the space of a heartbeat. "Stay behind me," he commanded, pulling out a phone with his free hand. His voice when he spoke was sharp and controlled. "Report." Whatever he heard made his expression turn deadly cold. Yamamoto operatives in the building, he said to Amara. They're testing our security response, looking for weaknesses. He ended the call and looked directly at her. Your 24 hours just expired, Amara Thompson. What's your answer? The sound of shattering glass came from somewhere above them. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs as the reality of her situation became crystal clear. She was trapped in a building under attack by people who might very well kill her just to send a message to the man standing beside her. I accept, she whispered. Louder. I accept your offer, Mr. Park. Park Jae-hyun smiled for the second time since she had met him, but this smile was sharp and satisfied, like a blade finding its target. Excellent. He touched his phone again. Secure the building and escort Miss Thompson to the safe room. Full protection protocols are now in effect. Before she could ask what that meant, the ballroom doors burst open and 4 men in expensive suits surrounded them. They moved with military precision, forming a protective formation around both her and Park Jae-hyun. Where are you taking me? Amara asked as they guided her toward a door she hadn't even noticed before. Somewhere the Yamamoto family will never find you, Park Jae-hyun replied. He walked beside her, his presence somehow reassuring despite the chaos erupting around them. Welcome to your new life, Amara. I promise it will be far more interesting than cleaning hotel rooms. The safe room turned out to be an elevator that descended far below the hotel's public levels. When the doors opened, Amara found herself in what could only be described as an underground fortress. The space was larger than her entire apartment, furnished with every comfort and equipped with technology that looked like it belonged in a spy movie. This is temporary, Park Jae-hyun explained as his men took positions at various monitoring stations. Until the current situation is resolved and your new accommodations are prepared. How long? As long as necessary. He removed his jacket, revealing a shoulder holster that confirmed her suspicions about the nature of his business. But don't worry. You won't be idle. We have much to discuss regarding your new responsibilities. Amara sank into a leather chair that probably cost more than her monthly salary, her mind struggling to process how completely her life had changed in the space of an hour. Yesterday, she was a knight made with impossible dreams. Tonight, she was under the protection of a Korean crime boss who had just paid her more money than she had ever seen in exchange for her talent and her loyalty. The sound of gunfire echoed faintly through the reinforced walls above them. Are they going to kill people? She asked quietly. They're going to try, Park Jae-hyun replied with lethal calm. They will not succeed. How can you be so sure? Because they made the mistake of threatening something that now belongs to me, he said, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. And I protect what's mine, Amara Thompson. Always. Outside her new world, violence raged as powerful men settled their differences with bullets and blood. But in this underground sanctuary, surrounded by technology and armed guards, and the quiet confidence of a man who controlled an empire, Amara felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years. She felt safe. The realization terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She had just sold her soul to the devil, but for the first time since her mother's diagnosis, she could imagine a future that didn't involve constant fear and exhaustion. Park Jae-hyun was watching her carefully, as if reading her thoughts in her expression. No regrets, he asked. Ask me again when this is over, she replied. His smile this time was warm, almost fond. I think I'm going to enjoy working with you, Miss Thompson. The sound of her formal name on his lips reminded her that everything had changed. She was no longer Amara the invisible maid. She was something new, something valuable, something worth protecting. She was his. The thought should have frightened her more than it did. 2 months after the night that changed everything, Amara Thompson woke in silk sheets overlooking Han River, her mother's medical bills a distant memory, and her body finally free from the bone-deep exhaustion that had defined her existence for 3 years. She had traded invisible survival for visible luxury, and most days she could convince herself it was the right choice. The Park family compound was a fortress disguised as paradise. Situated behind 12-foot walls in Gangnam's most exclusive district, it sprawled across manicured gardens and traditional courtyards, blending modern security with classical Korean architecture. Every door required biometric access. Every window was bulletproof. Every corner held cameras that watched with unblinking electronic eyes. But within those walls, Amara had found something she had never dared to hope for. Space to breathe, time to heal, and a studio that made her weep the first time she saw it. Park Jae-hyun had built it for her in the compound's east wing. 40 feet of polished hardwood floors, mirrored walls that stretched to vaulted ceilings, and sound equipment that could have serviced a professional theater. Floor-to-ceiling windows faced the private gardens, flooding the space with natural light that made every movement feel like poetry. The first morning she danced in that studio, she cried for an hour afterward. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally having a space worthy of her dreams. "Your tears concern me," Park Jae-hyun had said, appearing in the doorway with 2 cups of tea and the quietly observant manner that never seemed to miss anything. "Happy tears," she had managed to explain. "I haven't had a proper space to dance in 3 years. "Then you should dance every day," he had replied, setting the tea on a small table near the mirrors. "Consider it a professional requirement." But it had become so much more than professional requirement. In those morning hours when she moved through sequences that challenged and thrilled her, when she choreographed pieces that expressed emotions she couldn't speak aloud, when she rediscovered the artist she had buried beneath survival instincts, Amara felt herself coming back to life. And Park Jae-hyun watched. Not always, not intrusively, but often enough that she grew accustomed to glimpsing his reflection in the mirrors, his expensive suits and perfectly controlled posture a stark contrast to her flowing movements and artistic abandon. He never interrupted, never criticized, never requested specific pieces. But his presence had weight, attention, and something that felt increasingly like pride. The performances he had mentioned began 3 weeks into her residence. Cultural gatherings, he had called them, which turned out to mean elaborate dinner parties where Korea's most powerful families mingled over courses that cost more than most people's monthly salaries. These were not ordinary social events. These were diplomatic missions disguised as entertainment, where territorial disputes were negotiated over wine, where business alliances were forged between the fish course and the palate cleanser, where the wrong word or gesture could trigger consequences that extended far beyond hurt feelings. Amara's role was to provide interludes of beauty between the more serious conversations. She would perform solo pieces designed to give the men time to think, to process offers and counteroffers, to appreciate art while their minds worked through the complex calculations of power and profit. The first time she danced for 30 of Korea's most dangerous men, her hands shook for an hour beforehand. But when the music began and she moved into the center of the dining room, something magical happened. The tension that perpetually simmered between rival families seemed to dissolve. Conversations that had been sharp with barely contained hostility became more civil. Men who spent their days planning elaborate revenges found themselves united in appreciation for something purely beautiful. She was not naive about what they discussed when she wasn't dancing. These were criminals, killers, men who controlled empires built on violence and fear. But when she performed, she created moments of grace in their dark world, spaces where beauty mattered more than body counts. And Park Jae-hyun's eyes never left her during these performances. She could feel his attention like a physical touch, possessive and proud, and increasingly intimate. The way he watched her dance was the way other men watched their wives, their lovers, their most precious possessions. The staff treated her with careful respect that bordered on reverence. Mrs. Kim, the elderly woman who managed household affairs, addressed her as Miss Thompson and ensured her every comfort was anticipated. The security guards bowed when they passed her in the corridors. The kitchen staff prepared meals suited to a dancer's nutritional needs without being asked. She was not family, but she was clearly under Park Jae-hyun's specific protection, which in this world carried weight equivalent to blood relation. Her mother's treatment in Detroit had been transferred to a private facility that specialized in autoimmune disorders. The monthly reports Amara received were better than anything they had achieved with insurance ration care. Her mother was stable, comfortable, and for the first time in years, hopeful about the future. The price of this miracle was her absolute loyalty to a man whose business interests she was only beginning to understand. Park Jae-hyun was not just a crime boss. He was an emperor ruling a kingdom built on precision, loyalty, and the credible threat of overwhelming retaliation against those who crossed him. His organization handled everything from international shipping to real estate development to protection services that kept Seoul's underworld functioning according to established rules. But in the private moments when it was just the two of them, when he brought her tea during practice or asked about her mother's progress or listened to her thoughts about new choreography she was developing, he seemed less like an emperor and more like a man who had found something unexpectedly precious. The evening that changed everything between them began like many others. A gathering of 12 family heads, each representing territory and interests that spanned multiple countries. Dinner had been particularly tense, with reports of Yamamoto encroachment creating friction between traditionalists who favored immediate retaliation and pragmatists who counseled patience. Amara performed twice during the evening, pieces chosen specifically to encourage contemplation rather than aggression. By the time the guests departed, the mood had shifted from barely controlled hostility to cautious cooperation. She found Park Jae-hyun in his private office afterward, still wearing his formal dinner suit, but with his tie loosened and his usual perfect composure showing signs of strain. "Difficult evening," she observed, settling into the chair across from his desk with the familiarity that 2 months of proximity had created. "They grow impatient," he replied, pouring amber liquid from a crystal decanter into 2 glasses. "The young ones especially. They see Yamamoto aggression and want to respond with overwhelming force. But you prefer strategy. I prefer solutions that don't require explaining bodies to authorities who ask inconvenient questions," he said, offering her one of the glasses. "Your performances tonight help remind them that some problems require finesse rather than firepower." The whiskey was smooth and expensive, warming her throat and loosening the tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked, "managing all these different personalities and interests?" "Since I was 25, he replied. 10 years of building something that could survive both external threats and internal politics. That seems young to inherit so much responsibility." "I didn't inherit it. I took it." His dark eyes held hers over the rim of his glass. "My father was less strategic in his approach to business. He left behind chaos that required immediate organization. What happened to him? He made enemies faster than allies. Eventually, the mathematics caught up with him." The casual way he discussed his father's death told her everything about the world she now inhabited. Violence was a business tool. Death was a management failure. Survival required constant calculation of risk versus reward. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "The life you chose." Park Jae-hyun was quiet for a long moment, swirling the whiskey in his glass while he considered his answer. "I had a younger sister," he said finally. "Lee Min-young, 3 years younger than me. Gifted in ways that should have guaranteed her a life of beauty and success." His voice carried a weight she had never heard before, pain carefully controlled but not quite hidden. "She was a dancer. Like you. Classically trained, extraordinarily talented, accepted to study in Paris with some of the world's best instructors. She fell in love with a man who seemed charming, sophisticated, safe. Someone outside our world who promised her a normal life away from the dangers of our family business." Park Jae-hyun's knuckles had gone white around his glass. "I was too focused on consolidating power after my father's death to pay attention to what was happening in her personal life." "What happened?" "The man she loved was not what he seemed. He was working for a rival organization, tasked with getting close to her to gain information about our operations. When she discovered the truth and threatened to expose him, he killed her rather than risk his cover being blown." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Amara felt her heart clench with sympathy for the pain she could see beneath his controlled exterior. "By the time I realized what had happened, she was already dead," he continued. "Murdered by someone who saw her only as a tool to be discarded when she became inconvenient." "I'm so sorry," Amara whispered. "I killed him, of course, and everyone who helped him, and everyone who knew what he was planning and failed to warn her. But none of that brought her back." He set down his glass and looked directly at her, his dark eyes holding an intensity that made her breath catch. "You remind me what beauty looks like in a world of violence, Amara. You make me remember why I built this empire, why I maintain these careful balances of power and protection, not for the money or the fear or the respect, but to create space where precious things can exist safely. The admission hung between them like a confession, raw and honest in a way that transformed her understanding of their relationship. She wasn't just an asset or an employee or even a protected person under his care. She was his second chance at preserving something beautiful, his attempt to redeem a failure that haunted him every day. "Your sister would have been proud of what you've built here," she said softly. "She would have been horrified by the methods," he replied with bitter honesty. "But perhaps she would have understood the necessity." Amara stood and walked around the desk to where he sat, her movement graceful and deliberate. When she reached him, she placed her hand gently on his shoulder, feeling the tension in his muscles beneath the expensive fabric of his suit. "You can't save her by saving me," she said quietly. "But you can honor her memory by being the kind of man who protects beautiful things instead of destroying them." Park Jae-hyun looked up at her, his carefully controlled mask slipping to reveal something vulnerable and grateful and intensely focused on her face. "I know," he said, "but protecting you feels like the first good thing I've done since she died." The confession created a shift between them, an acknowledgement that their relationship had evolved beyond business arrangement into something far more personal and complex. When he reached up to cover her hand with his own, when his fingers intertwined with hers in a gesture of connection rather than command, Amara felt her pulse quicken with the recognition that they had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Outside the office windows, Seoul glittered in the darkness, beautiful and dangerous and full of threats that required constant vigilance. But in this moment, in this space they had created together, she felt something she hadn't experienced since her mother's diagnosis. She felt cherished. The realization should have terrified her, but instead it filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with expensive whiskey and everything to do with finally understanding why Park Jae-hyun watched her dance with such intense attention. He wasn't just protecting an asset. He was preserving something precious that connected him to the best parts of himself, the parts that remembered love and beauty and hope, the parts his sister would have wanted him to keep alive. But even as they sat in their bubble of shared understanding and growing intimacy, the outside world continued its dangerous dance of power and retaliation. Through the office windows, Amara could see additional security patrols moving through the compound's gardens. The Yamamoto threat hadn't disappeared. It was growing stronger, more focused, more personal. And soon, very soon, their peaceful sanctuary would be tested in ways that would require all of Park Jae-hyun's strategic brilliance and protective fury to survive. The attack came on a Tuesday morning when Seoul's autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves and false promises of peace. Amara was in her studio, working through a complex contemporary piece that challenged both her technical skills and emotional range, when the compound's emergency sirens began their bone-chilling wail. She froze mid-movement, her body suspended in an extension that suddenly felt vulnerable rather than graceful. In 2 months of living behind the compound's protective walls, she had never heard that sound. The daily rhythms of her new life, the careful routines of practice and performance, and growing intimacy with Park Jae-hyun had created an illusion of safety that now shattered like crystal hitting marble. The studio door burst open without ceremony. 2 of Jae-hyun's security team entered with military precision, their usual respectful demeanor replaced by grim efficiency. "Miss Thompson," the taller man said in accented English, "we need to move you to secure location immediately." "What's happening?" she asked. But even as the words left her mouth, she heard the answer in the distant sound of gunfire echoing across the compound's carefully maintained gardens. "Coordinated attack on multiple Park family properties," the man replied, already moving toward her with protective urgency. "Mr. Park's orders are absolute priority on your safety." Before she could process the implications, they were escorting her out of the studio and through corridors she had never seen before. Hidden passages built into the compound's traditional architecture, designed for exactly this kind of emergency. The walls were reinforced concrete behind their decorative wooden panels, and the floors were marked with directional arrows that glowed faintly in the dim emergency lighting. "Where is Park Jae-hyun?" Amara asked as they descended stairs that seemed to lead directly into the earth beneath the compound. "Coordinating response from Central Command," the guard replied. "He will join you when perimeter is secure." The safe room they brought her to was larger and more sophisticated than the underground space beneath the hotel. Multiple screens showed feeds from cameras positioned throughout the compound, revealing a battle that looked like something from a military operation rather than a criminal dispute. Men in dark clothing moved through the gardens with professional efficiency, their movements coordinated and purposeful. These weren't street thugs making territorial statements. These were trained operatives executing a carefully planned assault. And they were specifically targeting the east wing of the compound. Her wing. The realization hit her like cold water. This wasn't random violence or even conventional business competition. This was personal. The Yamamoto faction wasn't just attacking Park interests. They were coming for her. Miss Thompson, one of the technicians monitoring the feed, said quietly, "Mr. Park requests you remain away from the monitors. The images may be disturbing." But Amara couldn't look away. On screen after screen, she watched Jaehyun's security forces engage the attackers with lethal efficiency. She saw muzzle flashes in the pre-dawn darkness, bodies falling in garden paths she had walked just hours before, the careful beauty of the compound being transformed into a battlefield. And through it all, she heard Jaehyun's voice over the communication system, calm and controlled and absolutely murderous in its precision. Perimeter breach, Sector 7. Redirect Team 3 to intercept. Priority 1 remains the East Wing. No one approaches the studio level under any circumstances. He was orchestrating the entire defense while ensuring her specific safety remained paramount. She could hear it in every order he gave, every tactical decision he made. This wasn't just about protecting his territory or his organization. This was about protecting her. The thought should have been comforting, but instead it filled her with terror. If these people were willing to launch a military-style assault just to reach her, what would they do if they succeeded? "Miss Thompson, please step away from the screens," the technician repeated, more urgently this time. "Why?" she asked, but her question was answered by what she saw on the monitor showing the compound's main entrance. A black van had crashed through the gates, and armed men were pouring out with equipment that looked like it belonged to a SWAT team. But these weren't police. These were mercenaries hired to do a job that regular criminals couldn't accomplish. "They're not here to kill me," Amara whispered, the realization making her stomach clench with nauseating fear. "They're here to take me." The technician's expression confirmed her worst suspicions. An alive hostage was more valuable than a dead symbol. If the Yamamoto faction could capture Park Jae-hyun's precious dancer, they would have leverage that no amount of money or territory could provide. They would have the one thing he couldn't afford to lose. The battle raged for 3 hours. 3 hours during which Amara sat in a reinforced bunker, listening to explosions and gunfire and the calm, deadly voice of the man who had become the center of her world directing a war in her defense. She heard him order the deployment of resources that sounded military in scope. Helicopter support, coordinated strikes on Yamamoto properties across the city. The systematic dismantling of an entire criminal organization that had made the mistake of threatening something he considered his. She heard him speak to government officials who owed him favors, ensuring that police response would be delayed until his own forces had finished their work. She heard him contact allies and other families, calling in debts and forming temporary alliances that would reshape Seoul's underworld power structure. All of it because someone had tried to take her. When the compound finally fell silent, when the emergency sirens stopped their wailing and the gunfire faded to memory, Amara sat in the underground bunker surrounded by technology and armed guards, understanding for the first time the true scope of what Park Jae-hyun commanded. This wasn't just a crime family. This was an empire, complete with military capabilities and political connections that could mobilize government resources when necessary. And all of that power had just been deployed to keep her safe. The secure room's door opened with a soft hiss of hydraulics. Park Jae-hyun entered alone, still wearing his morning suit, but now rumpled and stained with substances she preferred not to identify. His usually perfect appearance showed signs of the battle he had just orchestrated. His dark hair was disheveled. His sharp features were harder than she had ever seen them, and his eyes carried a cold satisfaction that spoke of debts violently collected. But when he saw her sitting safely in her chair, when he confirmed with his own eyes that she was unharmed and whole, something in his expression shifted. The coldness melted into relief, so profound it was almost vulnerable. "Are you hurt?" he asked, crossing the room to where she sat with swift, sure strides. "No," she replied, though her voice shook slightly. "But they were coming for me specifically, weren't they?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because the Yamamoto family decided that the best way to destroy me was to take away the one thing I cannot afford to lose," he said, his voice carrying a weight of admission that changed everything between them. "The one thing you cannot afford to lose," she repeated quietly. Park Jae-hyun knelt beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level despite the expensive suit that was probably ruined beyond repair. When he spoke, his words carried the intensity of a man who had just faced the possibility of losing everything that mattered. "I told myself you were under my protection because it was good business," he said. "I told myself you were valuable because of your talent, your ability to create beauty in ugly situations. I told myself that keeping you safe was about honoring my sister's memory. And now I know the truth. You're not here because you're useful to me, Amara. You're here because losing you would destroy something essential in me that I didn't even know existed until I met you." The confession hung between them like a bridge across dangerous waters, an admission that transformed their carefully maintained professional relationship into something raw and honest and terrifyingly real. "You're mine," he continued, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Not as an employee, not as a contract, not as a protected asset. You're mine because you chose to be, and because I choose to be yours in return. And I will burn down anyone who tries to take you away from me." The possessive declaration should have frightened her, should have reminded her of all the reasons why loving a man like Park Jae-hyun was dangerous and impossible and guaranteed to end in heartbreak. Instead, it filled her with a fierce joy that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with finally being claimed by someone who understood what she was worth. "I'm yours," she said, reaching out to touch his face, feeling the tension in his jaw beneath her fingertips. "And you're mine, Jae-hyun. All your broken pieces and brilliant strategies and terrible, beautiful darkness. Mine." The sound of his given name on her lips seemed to break something loose inside him. He pulled her from the chair into his arms, holding her against him with a desperate intensity that spoke of fear finally released and possession finally acknowledged. When he kissed her, it tasted like relief and promise and the metallic edge of violence recently concluded. It was the kiss of a man who had just proven he would wage war to keep what belonged to him, and of a woman who had chosen to belong to someone dangerous enough to win that war. "Forever," he whispered against her lips, the word carrying the weight of an oath. "Forever," she agreed, understanding that she had just committed herself to a life that would never be safe or simple or anything resembling normal. But as Park Jae-hyun held her in the underground bunker where his empire's technology hummed quietly around them, as Seoul slowly returned to normal above their heads, as the Yamamoto threat was systematically erased from existence by forces she was only beginning to comprehend, Amara felt something she had never experienced before. She felt absolutely, completely, irrevocably claimed by someone who had the power to keep that promise. The battle was over. The enemy was eliminated. And she belonged to the most dangerous man in Seoul, who had just proven that no force on earth was strong enough to take her away from him. The compound would be repaired. New security measures would be implemented. The careful routines of their life would resume with adjustments that reflected lessons learned under fire. But something fundamental had changed between them in the space of a morning. They were no longer a crime boss and his protected asset. They were two people who had looked into the abyss of losing each other and chosen to bind themselves together with chains that could not be broken by external force. When they finally emerged from the bunker hours later, when they walked together through gardens that still showed scars from the morning's violence, when they stood in her studio where broken mirrors reflected their images in fractured pieces that somehow still showed them whole, Amara understood that she had crossed a line from which there could be no return. She had given her heart to a man who commanded armies, who could reshape the criminal landscape of an entire city with a few phone calls, who would kill without hesitation to protect what he loved. And she had never felt more completely, perfectly, dangerously alive. 6 weeks after the Yamamoto attack, Seoul had returned to its careful balance of beauty and danger, But the Park family compound bore new scars that served as permanent reminders of how quickly paradise could become a battlefield. The gardens had been replanted with bulletproof planters. The walls had been raised another 2 feet and topped with technology that could identify threats before they materialized. The staff moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had learned that eternal vigilance was the price of protecting precious things. But in her rebuilt studio, where new mirrors reflected autumn sunlight streaming through reinforced windows, Amara danced with a freedom she had never known before. Not the desperate freedom of stolen moments in empty ballrooms, but the expansive freedom of someone who belonged exactly where she was. The morning light caught the diamond on her left hand as she moved through sequences that expressed joy rather than yearning, hope rather than escape. Park Jae-hyun had proposed 3 days after the attack, in the ruins of her original studio, with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother and words that still made her breath catch when she remembered them. "I want you to be my wife," he had said, kneeling among broken mirrors that reflected their faces in countless fragments. "Not just the woman I protect, not just the artist I treasure, but my partner in everything I've built and everything we'll build together." The ring was a masterpiece of traditional Korean craftsmanship, white gold and diamonds set in a pattern that resembled cherry blossoms. When she wore it, when the light caught its facets and scattered rainbows across her studio floor, she felt the weight of belonging to something larger and more permanent than herself. Today was different, though. Today, as she practiced alone in the early morning hours, she knew it would be her last dance as Amara Thompson, struggling artist who had traded her dreams for survival. Tomorrow she would become Amara Park, wife of Seoul's most powerful crime boss and director of her own dance academy. The academy had been Jae-hyun's wedding gift to her, an idea that had evolved from casual conversation into architectural reality in the space of 6 weeks. Located in the compound's renovated West Wing, it would serve the children of Park family associates, teaching them that beauty and grace could coexist with the harsh realities of their parents' world. But more than that, it would be her legacy, her way of ensuring that other talented young women wouldn't have to choose between their art and their survival the way she had. The studio door opened quietly, admitting the man who had become the center of her universe. Park Jae-hyun entered carrying 2 cups of tea and wearing the fond expression he reserved for watching her dance. But today his usual composed confidence carried an undercurrent of something that looked almost like nervousness. "Cold feet?" she asked, accepting the tea with a smile that still felt new on her face. 6 weeks ago, smiling had been work. Now it was instinct. "About marrying the most extraordinary woman in Seoul," he replied, settling into the chair he had positioned near the mirrors specifically for these morning visits. "Hardly. Then what's that expression about? Your mother arrives this afternoon." The words sent a jolt of anticipation and anxiety through her system. Her mother, whose medical care had been revolutionized by access to Seoul's best private specialists, whose health had stabilized in ways their Detroit doctors had called miraculous, was finally well enough to travel for her daughter's wedding. "She's nervous about meeting you," Amara said. "As am I about meeting her." The admission surprised her. Park Jae-hyun, who negotiated with international criminals and commanded respect through 4 countries, was nervous about meeting a retired Detroit schoolteacher. "She's going to love you," Amara assured him. "You saved her daughter's life and gave her medical care that would have bankrupted us. She already thinks you walk on water. But she doesn't know the full scope of my business interests. She knows enough. She knows you protected me, provided for both of us, and made it possible for her to watch her daughter get married. That's all that matters to her." Park Jae-hyun was quiet for a moment, sipping his tea while he watched her stretch against the bar with the automatic grace that had first caught his attention in a hotel ballroom that felt like a lifetime ago. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked finally. "The life you left behind, the normalcy you could have had?" Amara considered the question seriously. The woman who had cleaned hotel rooms for survival, who had hidden her talent because the world couldn't profit from it, who had measured her worth in dollars sent home and hours of sleep sacrificed, felt like someone she had known rather than someone she had been. "I regret the years I spent invisible," she said. "I regret believing that survival was the best I could hope for. But I don't regret anything that led me to you. Even the danger." "Even the danger," she confirmed. "Because the alternative was slow death by 1,000 compromises." At least with you, I'm fully alive. Her answer seemed to satisfy something in him, because his expression shifted back to the quiet contentment she had learned to recognize as his version of happiness. The wedding preparations had been a delicate balance between his world and hers, between Korean traditions that honored his family's legacy and American customs that made her feel connected to her own roots. They would be married in the compound's central courtyard, surrounded by gardens that had been restored to beauty more stunning than before the attack. The guest list included some of the most dangerous people in Asia. Sitting alongside her mother, her college roommate who was flying in from Detroit, and the few friends she had managed to maintain despite her years of survival-focused isolation. It should have been an impossible social equation, but Park Jae-hyun had proven that careful planning could make even the most unlikely combinations work. "Your performance tonight," he said, referencing the reception that would follow their ceremony. "Are you prepared?" She was planning to debut a piece she had choreographed specifically for the occasion, a contemporary work that told the story of transformation, of finding grace in unexpected places, of love that grew from protection into partnership. It would be her first performance as his wife, her first dance as the woman who had claimed her place in his dangerous, beautiful world. "I've been ready for weeks," she replied. "But this morning I want to practice something else." "What?" "The piece I was working on the night you found me in the hotel ballroom. I never finished it." She moved to her sound system and selected the music that had been playing during those stolen moments when she believed herself unobserved. The contemporary piece that had challenged her technical skills and emotional range, that had been interrupted by security guards and transformed into the first step toward a life she could never have imagined. As the familiar melody filled the studio, Amara felt herself transported back to that night when she danced alone, believing her secret was safe, before Park Jae-hyun's eyes changed everything about her future. But this time, she danced knowing she was seen, knowing she was treasured, knowing that the man watching her understood not just the technical skill required for each movement, but the emotional journey that informed every gesture. She completed the piece as she had originally envisioned it, with extensions that showcased years of training, turns that demonstrated her control, movements that flowed together with the seamless grace that had once seemed wasted on empty ballrooms. When the music ended, she found herself breathing hard in the center of her studio, her reflection multiplied in mirrors that no longer showed a woman hiding her light, but a woman radiating it. "Perfect," Park Jae-hyun said quietly. "Absolutely perfect." He stood and crossed to where she stood, his movements carrying the predatory grace she had learned to associate with moments when his careful control slipped to reveal the intensity beneath. "6 months ago, you danced alone in the shadows, believing no one could see your worth," he said, taking her hands in his. "Tonight, you'll dance in the light, surrounded by people who know exactly how precious you are." The transformation he described felt as dramatic as he made it sound. From invisible maid to cherished wife, from hidden artist to celebrated performer, from woman who sacrificed everything for survival to woman whose dreams were not only supported but elevated beyond anything she had dared to imagine. "Tomorrow night, when you move to music in our home, in front of our family, wearing my ring and my name, you'll never again dance alone unless you choose to. Promise?" she asked, though she already knew his answer. "Promise," he confirmed, lifting her hands to his lips and pressing a kiss to the engagement ring that caught the morning light and scattered it like benediction. The afternoon brought controlled chaos as her mother arrived, as final wedding preparations were completed, as the compound transformed from fortress to venue for the most elegant celebration Seoul's underworld had seen in years. Her mother, despite 6 months of illness and treatment, looked radiant in a way that had nothing to do with the expensive clothes Park Jae-hyun had insisted on providing and everything to do with seeing her daughter happy. When she met her future son-in-law, when she saw the careful way he treated Amara, when she understood the scope of the life he had made possible for both of them, her approval was immediate and absolute. "Any man who loves my daughter enough to wage war for her safety is welcome in our family," she told him with the directness that had made her an effective teacher for 30 years. The ceremony itself felt like a dream orchestrated by someone who understood the difference between ostentation and elegance. Traditional Korean elements honoring his heritage blended seamlessly with acknowledgments of her American roots. The vows they exchanged were personal, specific, and absolutely binding. But it was the reception, it was her performance as his wife, that felt like the completion of a journey that had begun with stolen moments in an empty ballroom. She danced for an audience that included crime bosses and college friends, family matriarchs and international associates, people whose worlds should never have intersected, but who found common ground in witnessing something genuinely beautiful. The piece she performed told her story without words, expressed transformation through movement, celebrated the discovery that love could grow from the most unlikely foundations into something unshakable. And Park Jae-hyun watched from the head table with an expression of pride and possession and deep satisfaction that told everyone present exactly how thoroughly he considered himself the most fortunate man in Seoul. When the evening wound down, when the last guests departed and the compound returned to its normal rhythms of security and quiet luxury, Amara found herself in their bedroom, wearing silk pajamas that cost more than her former monthly salary and looking out at gardens where armed guards maintained their vigilant patrols. No regrets, Park Jae-hyun asked, echoing their earlier conversation, but with the weight of permanent commitment now settled between them. Ask me in 50 years, she replied, but her smile revealed the answer he needed. She had walked into a hotel ballroom with exhaustion and hidden dreams. She had walked out with a dangerous man's devotion and a future full of possibilities she was still discovering. He would use his empire to ensure that their children grew up safe, that her academy flourished, that she never again had to choose between art and survival. She would use her grace to create beauty in his dark world, to remind him daily why civilization was worth preserving, why love was worth protecting with overwhelming force. Together, they would dance through whatever challenges the future brought, secure in the knowledge that some bonds cannot be broken by external pressure. Some commitments transcend the ordinary boundaries of safety and risk. In the distance, Seoul glittered like a city of dreams, beautiful and dangerous and full of opportunities for those bold enough to claim them. But in their bedroom, in their compound, in the life they had built together from protection and gratitude and recognition of rare worth, Amara Park danced one final time for an audience of one, moving to music only they could hear, celebrating a love that had transformed them both in ways that would echo through generations. She was no longer running from anything. She was dancing toward everything, with a partner who understood that some dreams are worth any price, and some love is worth any danger. Forever in motion, forever in his arms, forever home.